This video is the first of 3 on Koine Greek participles. In this first video, we're going to introduce the basics of participles, what they are, and we're also going to introduce the basics of their syntax. We're not going to look at their forms yet. We'll do that in the next video, and in the third video, we'll put it all together, the syntax, the forms, into doing some translation. So the basics of participles. A participle is what is called a verbal adjective. David Allen Black calls this a grammatical hybrid. As a verbal adjective, participles take parts from verbs and they take parts from adjectives. That is, the things that you have been parsing about verbs, participles are going to take some of those things. Namely, they're going to have tense and voice. So every participle is going to have tense and voice, just like a verb does. But also, like adjectives, participles are going to have case, gender, and number. So you have these 6 different things that you are looking for when you parse a participle. You're looking for tense, voice, you're going to provide the mood, which is the participle. The participle is one of the Greek moods. So far we've had indicative moods in this solely in this class. Now we get to a new mood with participles. So you can't always just put in indicative anymore. When you have a participle, you stick participle into the mood. They also have case, that is nominative, masculine, genitive, dative, or accusative. Sorry, I said nominative masculine. I meant nominative, genitive, dative, or accusative. They have gender, masculine, feminine, or neuter. They have number, namely singular or plural. So number is singular or plural, not first, second, or third. And then lexical form is the dictionary form that you would find of the verb. So you would give the indicative verb form such as luo. So looking for all of these different things when you are parsing a participle, which is one of the things that makes participles a little bit difficult. And it's one of the things that Greek students tend to bemoan because of this fact, because you have to supply so many different things. But the good news is I'm going to give you some tips and tricks in these videos to sort of figure out the parsing information of different participles. So just as we've done for indicative verbs, ways to sort of filter out what's going on with indicative verbs, we're going to be able to do the same thing with participles. So I want to make one remark from the outset here. We're going to come back to this later on in another video, but I want to make sure I introduce it here so I kind of plant it into your brain. I'm just sticking it into your brain right now. It's going to come back later and we'll expand on it. And that is that when we're talking about tense with participles, we're going to have 3 different tenses of participles. They're either going to be present tense or aorist tense or perfect tense. And whereas with indicative verbs, we've largely correlated tense with the time of the action or when the action took place, that is not the case with the tense of participles. So when you come across a participle in a Greek sentence, you are not getting the time that the action took place in that sentence from the participle. Rather, you're getting the time the action took place primarily from the main verb or the indicative verb in the sentence. And that being the case, the tense of a participle is going to indicate something else, namely how the action of the participle relates to the action of the verb. So when you have a present tense participle, what's going to be happening is that the action of the participle, the verbal sense, the verbal action, whatever it might be, the loosing, the sending, the proclaiming, is going to happen at the same time as the verb. So an example of this would be carrying a stick, he went out into the desert. So the action is he went out into the desert. That's the main verb in this sentence. Carrying a stick, carrying is going to be our participle. So the action happened in past time. We know that from went into the desert. The carrying says that as he went into the desert in past time, he was carrying the stick at the same time. An aorist tense participle, you can think of it as throwing the action one step back from the action of the verb. So in an English example would be, having carried the stick, he went into the desert. So you imagine not a person carrying a stick into the desert in past time, but rather the person carried the stick, they stopped carrying the stick, that action was completed with the aorist participle, and then they went into the desert. Then they did the action of the indicative verb. And then a perfect tense participle is going to be the action of the participle has been completed and continues to have effects when the main verb happens. So we're still going to have that sense of the keyword has or have is going to be still going to be in play for a perfect tense participle. So all this to say, the main takeaway from this right now, we're going to come back to these ideas later on, but the main takeaway is that the tense of a participle does not indicate when the action of the sentence took place. All right, a little bit more on participle basics. Participles are divided into two different categories. Adjectival on the one hand, and there's going to be two different kinds of adjectival participles, and then adverbial on the other hand. When it comes to adjectival participles, our two different kinds are going to be attributive participles and substantival participles. And you may be thinking, attributive and substantival sound awfully familiar. That's good. They should sound familiar to you. These are terms that we used with respect to adjectives earlier in the semester. And you maybe are making a connection right now that a participle is a verbal adjective. So as a verbal adjective, participles can have these functions. It can be an attributive participle or a substantival participle. An attributive participle is going to modify a noun that it matches in case and number. So it's going to take the sort of idea of the verb and turn it into an adjective that modifies a noun. And normally you're going to see this translated with a relative clause, and you will translate with a relative clause. Something like who, which, that, etc. So an example of this would be the man who is speaking. The man is the noun. Who is speaking in Greek would be an attributive participle that is modifying the noun. A substantival participle, just like a substantival adjective, is going to function as the noun itself. So it's going to be the noun that is doing the action. So for example, we do things like the English gerund. The substantival participle is going to be similar to an English gerund. So something like writing is good. Writing would be a participle in Greek, and it would be in the nominative, masculine, and singular because it's the subject of the verb is. So it's going to have those bits from the adjective. It's going to be nominative because it's the subject, but it's going to convey the action of the verb writing. So writing is good would be a substantival participle in Greek, where it functions as the noun in the sentence and is not modifying another noun. So we have it with examples like writing is good, but also when it's made into a substantive, we'll often also do this with something like the ones. So if we were we could have, for example, the ones writing, or the ones who are writing, could be just two words in Greek, a definite article with the participle. So substantival participle is going to stand on its own and function as the noun. Attributive is going to modify a noun. And then the other category, so both of these are subsets of the adjectival participle. The other category is an adverbial participle, and it is not going to directly modify a noun or function as a noun in the sentence, though it will be related to another noun in the sentence or another subject in the sentence. But it's going to tell us the circumstances under which the action of the main verb took place. So you can see that adverbial is, add to or towards the verb. So it's functioning more towards the verb in the sentence than it is the noun. So if an adjective is a word that modifies a noun, these are going to be more noun-like or adjective-like. They're going to have properties of adjectives. I should say this is all are going to have properties of adjectives and verbs, but these ones are going to be more closely related to nouns and adjectives, whereas this one is going to be more closely related to the verb in the sentence, telling us the circumstances under which the verb takes place. Oftentimes, we're going to translate this temporally with words like while or when or after, oftentimes with the ing ending to the verb. So while writing, he ate his dinner, or also causally with the verb because. And then oftentimes when we use because, we'll go we'll make the participle into a finite verb. So because he wrote, he ate his dinner. Both of those could be participial phrases in the first half of the sentence, and then the eating in the second half of the sentence would be an indicative verb. All right, so what we're going to do here is a quick quiz on your whiteboard. As I told you earlier in the week intro, that it behooves you to do these well and do them carefully, and maybe do them more than once because you might see the material from them again. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. So go ahead and pause the lecture here. Answer these 9 questions on your whiteboard, and I will do the same, and we'll come back and compare answers. All right, whether or not your answers look like this for doing the work, for pausing the quiz and going to the effort to do this, let's go ahead and high five for that. 1, 2, 3, boom. And our answers here. Participles are verbal adjectives. Yes, this is true. They take parts from both verbs and adjectives. So from verbs, they get tense and voice, and from adjectives, they get case, gender, and number. What does the tense of a participle indicate? It indicates how the action relates to a verb. So it doesn't tell us necessarily the time of the action. We get the time of the action from the verb itself. The tense of the participle tells us how the action relates to the verb. With a present tense participle, we have simultaneous action. The action of the participle is taking place at the same time as the action of the verb. So if the verb is in the past tense, as if it's an aorist, for example, then the action of the participle is going to be happening at the same time in past time as the action of the verb. If the verb is a present tense verb and the participle is a present tense participle, the present action of the verb and the present action of the participle are happening at the same time. Moving on to our next question, if a participle is in the aorist tense, how is it going to relate to the action of the verb? The action of the participle is going to be completed, and then the action of the participle, or then the action of the verb, is going to happen after the action of the participle has been completed. So then 3 English examples here. So you'll notice that we haven't had any Greek up here yet. This is intentional so that we get the sort of grammar and syntax of participles introduced first. The man who was saying would be an attributive participle because the who was saying is modifying the noun the man. The one saying would be a substantival participle because it is doing the action of the noun itself. It's standing in for it, or it's substituting for the noun. And then while saying these things is going to be adverbial because it's going to tell us information of what happened when the person sat. It's giving us more information about the circumstances of the action of the verb. All right, let's do it one more time. As I've said, it's going to behoove you to do this, so I'm giving it to you twice with it mixed up. So let's go ahead one more time, pause the lecture, and answer these same questions in a different order. All right, one more time. Let's high five for you doing the work. 1, 2, 3, boom. And our answers here. The man who was saying would be an attributive participle. The saying, the action of saying, the verbal action is adjectively and attributively modifying the man, another noun in the sentence. An aorist tense participle relates to the action of the verb. The completed action of the participle, the action of the participle is completed, and then the action of the verb takes place. It is true that participles are verbal adjectives, taking parts both from verbs and adjectives. From verbs, they take tense and voice. While saying these things would be an adverbial participle. It's telling us information about the circumstances of the verb. The person sat. Participles take what from adjectives? They take case, gender, and number. The tense of a participle indicates the action of the participle's relationship to the main verb. So whether it's completed or simultaneous with respect to the aorist and the present, respectively. The one saying would be a substantival participle. It's standing in for a noun as the subject. And then how does a present tense participle relate to the action of the verb? The action of the participle happens simultaneously or at the same time as the action of the verb. All right, a little bit more on the Greek syntax of participles. So far we've sort of given a general overview of participles and given some information about them. Now we're going to specifically talk about not their forms, not what they're necessarily going to look like, but how they're going to relate grammatically to certain things in a sentence. So we've already gotten the different kinds of participles out there. An attributive participle is going to modify a noun, and it's going to match it in case, gender, and number. We've said it's translated usually with a relative clause, and the new information that we get in this slide is that the article is in attributive position. So you remember, I'm sure, very, very well, the different positions of articles for adjectives. So remember, an attributive participle is a subcategory of adjectival participles. And so what we have here is just like an attributive adjective has the participle or has the article before it. So you remember something like ha, kalos, anthropos means the good human. The adjective kalos comes before anthropos. It agrees with it in case, gender, and number, and the definite article is right before it, indicating that it's attributive. The other way to do this would be ha anthropos, ha kalos, and that would also be an attributive relationship. The same thing is true with participles. If kalos were instead a participle, which we haven't introduced any forms yet, so I'm not going to put anything in there and confuse you, but if this were a participle, this would be an attributive participle. The same sort of syntax of attributive adjectives applies to attributive participles. So I give you two examples here where, so I just lied to you. I told you I'm not going to put Greek forms up there. I do. Pisteuon here is going to be our participle in both cases. And you notice here the article comes right before it. Aner is man, the faithful man, or the believing man. The same thing over here, ha aner, ha pisteuon. This one is also attributive because the article directly precedes the participle. And another note about this is that you can have other things coming after the participle. So because participles are verbal adjectives, like verbs, they can take things like a prepositional phrase after it. So this would be the ha pisteuon, the believing in the Lord man. So ha pisteuon still matches aner, but this eis ton kurion, in the Lord, has been stuck right after pisteuon to give us more information about the believing. So that's something to be aware of, is the noun might not be directly after the participle. There might be material that intervenes there. So that's the syntax of the attributive participle. The syntax of the substantival participle is going to be similar to the syntax of the substantival adjective, wherein the adjective functions as a noun with a substantival participle, the participle functions as a noun in a variety of different cases. It could be in the nominative, the genitive, the dative, or the accusative, depending on its function in the sentence. We've said that this is often translated the ones, and the syntax here is going to be that the article precedes the participle and there is no noun because the participle is standing for the noun. So to use the same participle, pistuon, notice that the article is right before it, and this is going to tell us actually the case, gender, and number of the participle. So this is a nominative masculine singular. Remember I told you before that memorizing the definite article paradigm was going to pay dividends. It still is paying dividends. If you still haven't memorized it well, memorize it well because it's going to really help you for participles. So what we have here is a nominative masculine singular participle that's standing for the noun itself, that it is the subject of the sentence. The believing one says. And lastly, the adverbial participle. We've said it tells us more information about the circumstances of the verb. It's best translated with a variety of different kinds of clauses, and oftentimes with ing added to the idea of the verb, or sort of the core meaning of the verb with ing added. And what you're going to find is that it's going to be in predicate position. You'll remember from adjectives, predicate position means that there is no article before, when it comes to adjectives, before the adjective. When it comes to participles, it's of course before the participle, that there's not going to be any article there. And it's still going to agree with the noun, a noun that it goes with in case, gender, and number, but it's not going to be directly connected to it. So the example here, katabainon, is the participle, and it matches ha aner. You don't know this because you don't know this form yet, but this is a nominative masculine singular, and so is this. So this is telling us what the man is doing as he does this action. So this whole thing here is the participial phrase, and this whole thing here is going to be the indicative phrase. So this means going down to the sea, the man was carrying a boat. So the carrying of the boat is happening as the man is walking down to the sea. Do you like my, this is how one carries a boat down to the sea, if you didn't know. I'm really good at charades, really fun at parties. So this action is happening at the same time as this, because this is a present participle, and it's an adverbial participle. So this is the main point with respect to this slide, is we don't have any article before this. There's no article here, meaning, which gives us our hint that this katabainon is an adverbial participle, telling us the circumstances under which the main verb epherein, an imperfect third person singular verb, happened. So the going down to the sea happened as the man was carrying the boat. These things are happening at the exact same time. So what I've done here is I've given you all of this same information that was on 3 separate slides onto one slide, so it's in one convenient place for you as to your electronic documents go. So that we have the attributive participle, the substantival participle. Remember, both of these are subcategories of the adjectival participle, and they're both going to have the article before them. Substantival participle is not going to have another noun that it's modifying. An attributive participle will have another noun that it's modifying. And the adverbial participle is not going to have the article before it. It's going to be in predicate position, and it's going to tell us more about the circumstances under which the verb happened. And we're going to close out this part 1 of 3 on participles with another quick quiz. So the third one for this video, and this is for your benefit. I'm not doing this, to try and give you busy work, but really because I want to get these ideas in your mind, not only so you know them, but also so that you can answer these questions in another form later on in a different format that might be, potentially beneficial for your grade. So go ahead and answer these 7 questions. Pause. We're only going to do it one time this time. I promise I won't shuffle them up and give you it again just once. Go ahead and answer the questions. I'll do the same and we'll come back together. All right, one more time for your work. Let's high five. 1, 2, 3. Boom. Good job. These are our answers. So we have three different kinds of participles, an attributive and a substantival and an adverbial. The first two are a subcategory of adjectival participles because participles take things from adjectives and things from verbs. Which two kinds of participles will have the article before them? Those that are adjectival, namely the attributive and the substantival participles. Which kind of participle will not have the article before it? Adverbial participles. Would the man who was saying, this phrase who was saying, would it have an article before it? Yes, it would, because it's an attributive participle that's modifying another noun. So the other answer is yes. The man is the other noun that it's modifying. It would match in case, gender, and number. Would the one saying have an article? Yes, it would have an article. Would it have another noun that it modifies? No, we don't have any other noun here, just the one saying, which would be a participle in Greek in the nominative because it's the subject of the sentence. Would while saying these things, the person sat, have an article? Would this potential participle have an article? The answer is no, it would not have an article because it is what? Nailed it, adverbial. And lastly, name which one of these is which. So we have the article, the participle, the noun that it corresponds to or it matches in case, gender, and number. Nominative, masculine, singular. This is an attributive because we have the article before it and we have another noun. Hapistuon is going to be substantival and lege here is going to be our verb. So we have an article with a participle, but we don't have any other noun there. So we have a substantival where this is functioning as the subject of the verb, lege. This one also would be the subject. We don't have a verb there. The believing man is the subject. This one is just the believing one. And then down here we have an adverbial participle, pistuon, no article before it. So this is translated believing the man says. So in English we would do this as believing, comma, the man says. So the believing and the saying happen at the same time because this, and you don't know the forms yet, but this is a present tense participle. So these actions happen simultaneously. If this were an aorist tense participle, which it could be, then what would happen? How would this action relate to this verb if this was an aorist tense participle? And this is the last question for the video, I promise. Nailed it. Yes, the action of believing would happen first and then the speaking would happen. So it would be having believed or after having believed, the man says.